Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking on a concept that has really fundamentally redefined success, not just in the modern era, but you could argue for all time.
Yeah.
Emotional intelligence, or, EQ. For decades, the intellectual heavyweight championship in schools, universities, early career hiring, it was all decided by IQ.
The intelligence quotient, right? The one
Yeah,
number.
exactly. But we're here to unpack this mountain of evidence that shows why your ability to handle yourself and to handle others, your emotional dexterity, is often a far stronger, more consistent predictor of how well you thrive, adapt, and lead.
And that is really the core of our exploration today.
Right.
We're trying to move past
Past the buzzword.
the buzzword status that emotional intelligence sometimes gets saddled with and dive deep into the science. Our mission is to really dissect the concept, looking at its three core theoretical models, the fascinating and I think irrefutable neuroscience that underpins it, and most importantly, the practical applications. Because these aren't just abstract ideas. These are tangible, trainable skills that can, immediately transform your most important relationships and dramatically upgrade your leadership capabilities.
When we talk about EI, the core definition, I think, based on all the research we've looked at, is it's a critical set of skills. It enables you to recognize, understand, manage, and effectively utilize emotions.
And that last part is so key. Utilization.
It's the key. It's not just about managing conflict. It's about leveraging emotions in positive, goal-oriented ways. So using a state of calm to, say, enhance communication or fostering empathy to overcome a big challenge.
Deliberately managing stress to maintain focus, all of that. And the utility is it's huge. The research consistently shows that EI is a stronger predictor of life success than raw intellectual capacity alone. And that's across, well, pretty much every domain.
You're talking about everything from, personal well-being to how long a marriage lasts?
To the financial performance of a whole division in a company. Yeah, it's that broad.
And here's the part that's genuinely revolutionary, I think, the good news. It's what separates EQ from something more fixed, like IQ.
Right.
Emotional intelligence isn't a gift you're just born with. It's a set of skills. It can be systematically developed, cultivated, and enhanced through practice.
Through deliberate self-reflection, mindfulness.
You can absolutely get smarter emotionally.
You can. And to really appreciate this huge paradigm shift, this move away from IQ as the only metric, we have to rewind the tape a little. Think back to the 20th century. For decades, IQ was the monolithic measure of a person's potential.
We measured analytical reasoning, verbal comprehension, math skills, and if you got the high scores, you were basically pre-stamped for success.
But the data started to betray that model. It started revealing what we now call the performance gap.
You had these genuinely brilliant people, individuals scoring in the 99th percentile on IQ tests who were, frankly, abysmal leaders.
Terrible leaders. They couldn't handle the complexities of managing a team. They just crater under relational stress, or they lacked the social dexterity to move up in an organization.
Right. And at the same time, you'd see others, maybe with more modest cognitive profiles, who just excelled in those exact environments.
They were great delegators, superb communicators, resilient under pressure. And that gap, that was the proof. It confirmed that the traditional model of intelligence was It was incomplete. It was missing this huge dimension for processing social and emotional data.
So when did this start to take academic root? Because Daniel Goleman's book in '95, that made it a household name, but the idea must have been brewing for a lot longer.
Oh, for sure. The term emotional intelligence actually first appeared in academic literature way back in 1964, a guy named Michael Beldock. But the real groundwork was laid by Howard Gardner's work in 1983 on multiple intelligences.
Okay.
That's where he formally broke that monolithic definition of intelligence and introduced interpersonal and intrapersonal intelligence as separate, measurable things.
So that created the academic space for this idea to grow.
Absolutely. Then the critical academic shift came in 1990. Peter Salovey and John Mayer, they formalized the definition. And they argue that emotion itself isn't just a reaction. It's a distinct, vital system of information processing, just as valid as logic.
And then Goleman's book took that academic insight and just launched it into the public consciousness.
Catapulted it, yeah.
So the big reframing was the key. We went from asking, how fast can you solve a logic problem, to a much more valuable question. How well do you handle yourself and others?
Exactly. It's a recognition that emotional data, that feeling that someone's uncomfortable, or the shift in your own stress level, that's all information. It has to be processed for you to function optimally. It's not just background noise you should ignore.
It redefined the entire metric of human capital.
It really did.
Okay, so let's unpack this architecture of effect.
Right.
One of the first things you realize when you do a deep dive here is that when researchers talk about EI, they aren't always talking about the same thing. The scientific study is generally split into three major distinct theoretical frameworks: ability, mixed, and trait.
And understanding this taxonomy is absolutely crucial. I can't stress that enough, because the framework you choose determines how you measure EI and then how you train it and what outcomes you can expect.
If you don't know which model you're using, you could be confusing personality traits with actual cognitive ability.
Exactly. You're comparing apples and oranges.
So let's start with the one that tries to define EI as an actual measurable intelligence, sort of like the IQ model. That's the ability model from Salovey and Mayer.
This is the purest definition of emotional intelligence as a set of cognitive skills. It defines EI as a standard intelligence made up of distinct, measurable skills related specifically to processing emotional information.
And crucially, it rejects putting personality traits in there.
Right. No motivation, no optimism, none of that. It's purely about mental horsepower applied to emotional data.
Okay, and if it's defined as an ability, it has to be measured like one. So how does that measurement differ from, say, what Goleman does?
It's measured through performance-based tests, a lot like an IQ test. The big one is the Mayer-Salovey-Caruso Emotional Intelligence Test, or the MSEI.
The MSEI.
Yeah. So instead of asking you, how often do you think you are empathetic, which is a self-report,
Which anyone can fudge.
anyone can fudge, the MSCEI presents you with scenarios, pictures of faces, little stories, artistic images, and it asks you to solve emotion-based problems, like identify the emotion in this face, or predict the outcome of this situation. You're tested on your maximum performance, not what you typically think you do.
And the MSCEA is structured around this four-branch hierarchy, which seems like a really great progressive way for you to kind of internalize the steps required for high emotional competence. Can you walk us through those four branches, starting with the absolute foundation?
Sure. The base level, branch 1, is perceiving emotions. This is the foundational sensory input stage. It's just the ability to accurately identify emotions in yourself and in other people.
Through nonverbal cues.
Right. Decoding subtle facial expressions, like distinguishing real surprise from polite, feigned surprise. Recognizing shifts in body posture, listening acutely to voice tones, understanding culturally specific signals. If you fail to accurately perceive the cue, the whole process just breaks down.
You're missing critical information from the start.
You are. You're operating on bad data.
So if I see a colleague smiling, but their shoulders are tight, a high EI person registers the tightness, not just the smile. Okay. So once that perception is registered, we move to utilization. Branch 2. Using emotions to facilitate thought. That sounds almost counterintuitive. Harnessing a feeling for a logical outcome.
And this is where the ability model really separates itself from those older, more restrictive ideas about intelligence. It's the capacity to harness your emotional states to support your cognitive activities. High EI individuals are masters at this. They intuitively match their mood to the required task.
Okay, give me an example.
Okay. Imagine you're preparing for a difficult, high-stakes negotiation. You might deliberately leverage a feeling of, let's say, focused resolve, maybe even a slight tension, because that intense focus helps you spot subtle shifts in the other person's body language, and it keeps you sharp.
Whereas a different task would require a totally different state.
Exactly. Contrast that with a brainstorming session for a new product. That task demands divergent, creative thinking. So here, a positive, high-energy mood, a state of excitement or playful curiosity, is much more effective. It actually activates different parts of the brain that foster novel connections.
You're leveraging the emotional state to optimize your cognitive performance for that specific job.
Precisely.
Okay, the third branch is where we introduce analysis, understanding emotions.
This is the analytic processing stage.
Yeah.
So you're moving beyond just simple recognition to actual comprehension. It's about grasping emotional language, tracing how feelings evolve over time, and understanding how they combine or blend. For instance, a high EI person understands that a complex feeling like jealousy is often a mix of anger, fear, and sadness.
And what about the genealogy of an emotion?
That's a great way to put it. It's about tracing the cause and effect. It's recognizing that, say, a partner's outburst of anger isn't the primary emotion. It's actually a secondary defense mechanism that was triggered by an earlier feeling of disappointment or hurt.
And if you understand the genealogy, you can address the root cause, not just the loud symptom.
Exactly. And that predictive analytical capacity is crucial for navigating any complex social dynamic. It stops you from constantly just fighting fires.
And finally, the highest, most integrated skill, the one that governs the whole process. Branch 4, managing emotions.
This is what we could call strategic emotional intelligence. It's the pinnacle of the ability model. It's the sophisticated skill to regulate emotions in yourself and in others to promote intellectual growth and achieve specific intentional goals.
And you have to stress this is not suppression, it's regulation.
A critical difference.
Yes, so what's the difference between suppression and strategic regulation in practice?
Suppression is a brute force effort to just bottle up a feeling. And that often backfires. It actually increases your physiological stress. Regulation is intentional choice. It involves monitoring the emotion, reflecting on its usefulness, and then deciding whether to engage with it, enhance it, or detach from it.
So for a leader, that might mean...
For a leader, it might mean deliberately projecting calm during a crisis, even if they feel some internal anxiety, because the goal team's stability overrides their immediate feeling. Or, conversely, it could mean deliberately expressing genuine outrage to signal to the organization that an ethical boundary has been seriously violated.
So you're strategically using the emotion to enforce a value.
You got it.
Okay, so moving from that very strict cognitive ability approach, we get to the mixed models. And these are arguably the most popular frameworks in organizational psychology. This is where Daniel Goleman and Reuven Bar-On really come into play.
Yeah, the mixed models are broader because they deliberately combine the core emotional abilities, like empathy, with traditional personality traits and social competencies.
And motivational factors like achievement drive or optimism.
All of that. And they're immensely popular in business because they focus on observable, trainable competencies that are necessary for success in a work context.
Goleman's competency framework is probably the one that most people have heard of. It begins with the cornerstone, self-awareness.
Correct. Self-awareness is the absolute prerequisite. If you don't know what you are feeling and why, you're basically operating blind. This means accurately recognizing your emotions, understanding your typical triggers, and knowing how those states affect your performance and the people around you.
And that knowledge then feeds into self-management.
Which is where the executive control happens. Self-control, conscientiousness, adaptability, and crucially, keeping those disruptive emotions and impulses in check.
And then Goleman shifts the focus outwards for the social dimensions.
That's social awareness. So
Yeah.
the ability to sense others' feelings, understand their perspectives, which is empathy, and grasp the emotional currents and power dynamics within an organization or a market. This is your sensing mechanism for the external world.
And finally, relationship management.
The culmination. This involves applying all that awareness to influence, to communicate clearly, resolve conflict, and build functional, strong bonds. This is EI in action. It's the ability to strategically move people and ideas forward.
And we also have the Bar-On model, or the EQI, which seems to explicitly define emotional resilience and mood as part of the intelligence.
The Bar-On model is another significant mixed model. It defines EI through 5 scales, and it notably includes stress management, the ability to tolerate high levels of stress and manage your impulse control, and also general mood, which covers optimism and happiness.
So this model recognizes that resilience and a positive outlook aren't just pleasant side effects.
No, they're foundational components of effective emotional functioning, especially when you're under sustained pressure.
Okay, and just briefly, let's touch on the third approach, the trait model, which is championed by Petrides and Furnham.
The trait model is different because it completely avoids defining EI as a cognitive ability. Instead, it defines it as a collection of emotional self-perceptions and behavioral dispositions. It effectively places EI firmly within a personality framework.
And it's measured with self-report questionnaires like the TAE. So it's focusing on typical performance, what you perceive yourself doing.
Exactly, how you generally handle situations.
Now, I know the criticism here is that this approach can heavily overlap with established personality tests. So why do its proponents argue that it's still distinct and useful?
And that's a fair critique. The trait model does correlate heavily with the big 5 personality factors. It's negatively correlated with neuroticism, so low EI means high emotional instability.
And I'm positively with extroversion.
Right. Higher sociability often means higher perceived social skills. But proponents argue that one specific component is uniquely predictive. Emotional self-efficacy.
So, your belief in your own emotional abilities.
Exactly. And that self-belief is a powerful psychological factor. It influences how hard you try, how you interpret failures, how quickly you recover from setbacks. So it's a valuable measure of your behavioral predisposition, regardless of whether it's a strict cognitive ability or a personality trait.
Moving beyond the theoretical distinctions, this is where we hit the hard science that really legitimizes EI and explains why it matters so much in decision-making. For centuries, Western philosophy basically viewed reason and emotion as
The
enemies.
classic dualism. Emotion was a weakness that had to be conquered by logic.
Right, and that dualism is just. It's been thoroughly dismantled by modern neuroscience. The work of scientists like Antonio Damasio shows conclusively that emotion is not just noise or disruption. It is, in fact, absolutely indispensable for rational, timely decision-making.
Without feeling, we actually become paralyzed by logic.
That sounds so counterintuitive. How does emotion facilitate better rationality? Let's get into Damasio's groundbreaking idea, the Somatic Marker Hypothesis, or SMH.
The SMH explains the mechanism beautifully. The core concept is that our decision-making is profoundly influenced by what he calls somatic markers. These are rapid physiological changes, gut feelings, heart rate spikes, clammy hands, that are associated with our past emotional experiences.
So the body acts like an automated risk assessment scanner. How does that signal generation work when we're facing a complex choice with a lot of variables?
Okay, so when you face a decision with uncertain high-stakes outcomes, your brain, specifically a part called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, or VMPFC, it runs a rapid subconscious simulation of potential outcomes based on your history.
A simulation.
A simulation. And if this simulation anticipates a negative outcome, maybe a choice that led to embarrassment or financial loss in the past, it triggers a negative somatic state. That tight feeling in your chest, that's a negative marker, and it acts as an automated alarm bell.
And that alarm serves to interrupt the logical process.
Exactly. It doesn't replace the logic, but it biases the decision maker away from the risky outcome before they have time to complete a full, laborious logical analysis. It's an invaluable shortcut. Think about standing at a cliff edge. The logical part of your brain says the structural integrity of this cliff is probably fine.
But the somatic marker is screaming, danger, fall risk.
Right. The alarm signal is what stops you from performing the calculation. The body signals the risk before the mind can finish the equation.
The empirical evidence for this is famously demonstrated with the Iowa gambling task, the IGT. Tell us about that.
The IGT is a perfect laboratory test for this concept. It cleanly separates emotional warning signals from conscious knowledge. So participants are given 4 decks of cards. Decks A and B are the bad decks. They offer high immediate rewards, but they also carry catastrophic, unpredictable penalties. So you get a net loss over time.
And decks C and D are the good decks.
Right. Small rewards, but also small, predictable penalties. So you get a steady, sustainable net gain.
So rational analysis would eventually lead you to just stick with the good decks, C and D.
That's right. And healthy participants usually figure this out logically after about 50 to 80 trials. But what is stunning is the physiological data. Researchers measure skin conductance responses, or SCRs, a measure of emotional arousal linked to sweating on their fingertips.
Okay.
Healthy participants start generating high SCRs, emotional fear signals, when their hand just hovers over the bad decks, A or B, after only about 10 to 20 trials. And crucially, they begin avoiding those bad decks before they can consciously articulate the pattern or explain why the decks are bad.
Wow, so their body's signaling stop long before their conscious mind can even articulate the reason. Now, what happens to the patients with the specific brain damage?
This is the tragic and powerful part of the experiment. Patients with damage to that VMPFC, the part of the brain that integrates these emotional signals, they present with normal memory and normal IQ. They are fully capable of logical analysis.
But in the IGT, they perform terribly.
Terribly. Why? They lack the anticipatory SCRs. They have no gut feeling. They just keep choosing the high-risk, high-reward decks.
Even when they know better.
Precisely. Even when they logically know, after 80 or 100 trials, that decks A and B are bad, they keep choosing them because the high reward is tempting, and they lack that automated emotional alarm that says, don't touch that.
That is a staggering implication for EI. It suggests that high EI isn't just about managing your mood. It's about having an optimized system for processing risk and reward. It makes us fundamentally more rational in complex settings.
Absolutely. High EI is the optimized ability to detect, interpret, and trust these internal somatic signals. It lets you quickly distinguish between a genuine strategic threat, a valid intuition, and just mere performance anxiety, which is noise. It facilitates faster, more accurate, and ultimately more rational decisions in the real world, where you rarely have the luxury of complete data.
We are fundamentally feeling machines that think.
Not thinking machines that feel. That's the takeaway.
This ability to interpret and regulate emotional data is yes. It's absolutely critical in our most complex, high-stakes environments, our intimate personal relationships. When two people are trying to share a life, EI is basically the operating system.
It's the foundational cornerstone of any healthy, intimate connection. Emotionally intelligent partners are just so much more adept at navigating those inevitable emotional moments with care and intention. They build a kind of safety net that fosters deeper trust, facilitates open communication.
And it gives them the ability to understand each other's emotional needs, often without constant, exhausting, explicit explanation.
Exactly. The research from the Gottman Institute, which is based on decades of observing thousands of couples, it provides an empirical blueprint for how high EI manifests in conflict. And they emphasize that thriving relationships are not distinguished by the absence of conflict.
But by how couples approach disagreement.
Right. Conflict is guaranteed. What distinguishes high-quality relationships is the ability to repair, not just avoid. And the first, most dangerous physiological state they identified in conflict is flooding.
Explain what flooding is, because it sounds like more than just being angry.
It is far more than anger. Flooding is a state of diffuse physiological arousal, where one or both partners' heart rate goes above 100 beats per minute.
Wow.
And when this happens, the body releases a flood of stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol. You're in full fight-or-flight mode. This state literally shuts down your prefrontal cortex, the center for rational thought, for humor, for empathy. Physiologically, listening becomes impossible. You literally lose the ability to think flexibly or compassionately.
So you cannot solve a problem when your brain is actively telling you that you are fighting for your survival against your partner. What's the high EI antidote?
It's self-regulation in the moment, and it's powered by self-awareness. The high EI partner recognizes the physical signs of flooding, the racing heart, the tense neck, the tunnel vision, and they call for a deliberate 20-minute timeout.
And the 20 minutes is important.
The 20 minutes is critical, because that's roughly how long it takes for the parasympathetic nervous system to fully restore physiological calm and bring that prefrontal cortex back online. A 5-minute break isn't enough. The body needs time to process the stress hormones.
The Gottmans also famously identified 4 communication patterns, which they called the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and they predict relationship dissolution with stunning accuracy over 90%.
Yeah, these are catastrophic failures of relationship management.
Let's run through them and their high EI antidotes. The first is criticism.
So this is not a complaint. It's an attack on your partner's global character. It uses always or never statements. For example, saying, "You are fundamentally lazy and you never help around the house."
And the antidote is the soft startup. How does a high EI partner transition from criticism to a productive conversation?
The soft startup shifts the focus from character to a specific behavior. You use I statements and you focus on a positive need. So instead of "you are lazy," it becomes, "I feel overwhelmed and worried when I see the dishes piled up and I need us to agree on a schedule for sharing that chore."
You're addressing the need in the situation without triggering immediate defensiveness.
You are. Next is the worst offender, the single greatest predictor of divorce: contempt.
Contempt is toxic. It signals a profound, established disrespect.
Right. It's examining your partner from a position of superiority. It manifests as eye-rolling, sarcasm, sneering, mocking, hostile humor. Contempt is like acid on the relationship. It just dissolves affection and trust. It tells your partner, "You are beneath me."
If the problem is profound disrespect, the solution has to be equally profound.
It does. The antidote to contempt is building a culture of appreciation and admiration. This requires you to actively scan the environment for things to genuinely appreciate about your partner, their kindness, their effort, their humor, and then vocalizing that appreciation regularly. You're effectively counterbalancing the pervasive negativity that contempt breeds.
Okay, the third horseman is defensiveness.
Defensiveness is the predictable response to criticism. It's self-protection, it's playing the victim, making excuses, or warding off a perceived attack by escalating the blame. "It's not my fault you never told me correctly."
It just blocks communication.
Completely. And the EI skill to counteract this is taking responsibility. This requires humility, radical acceptance. It means acknowledging your contribution, however small, to the problem. Just saying, "You know what, you're right, I did mess that up, I apologize." That de-escalates the exchange instantly. It allows the other partner to feel heard.
And the final horseman's stonewalling is often a direct result of the flooding we talked about earlier.
Correct. Stonewalling is withdrawing, shutting down, closing off communication, often by physically leaving the room or just mentally checking out. The antidote is that self-regulation we identified, recognizing the physical need for a physiological break and taking that 20-minute time out, but promising to return to the discussion when calm is restored.
Beyond just managing conflict, high EI couples also use techniques that prioritize emotional validation, like emotion coaching conversations.
This technique is so vital for building intimacy. Partners take turns sharing their emotional experiences, and the listener's primary job is to focus completely on reflecting back and validating those feelings before offering any solutions or advice.
So saying something like, I can understand why you'd feel so frustrated and let down by that situation.
Yes, that's often far more powerful than immediately jumping in to fix the issue, because it fulfills that fundamental human need to be heard and understood.
There's a final, profound insight from the Gottman work that fundamentally changes how we think about long-term partnerships. It's the realization that most conflict isn't solvable.
The specific finding is just staggering. 69% of relationship conflicts are perpetual. They're rooted in fundamental core values, personality differences, unmovable needs, like one partner needing more independence and the other needing more closeness.
So low EI couples get stuck in gridlock.
Yes, they repeat the same painful, unwinnable argument for years, constantly seeking a solution that just doesn't exist.
But high EI couples find a way to navigate the unsolvable.
They shift to dialogue. They accept the problem won't go away, but they discuss it with affection, often using humor. They're seeking merely to understand the underlying dream or history behind their partner's rigid position.
So understanding that a partner's need for absolute financial security isn't about control, but maybe it stems from a childhood experience of scarcity.
Exactly. That's empathy and understanding emotion at the deepest level. It turns an unsolvable problem into a point of ongoing affectionate conversation.
So if EI is critical in saving a marriage, it is absolutely essential in the workplace, especially when we talk about leadership excellence. The sources are definitive. EI is the critical differentiator between good management and great leadership.
It is, emphatically. Research suggests EI accounts for nearly 90% of the difference between average and top-performing leaders in competency models. And the evidence confirms that famous adage you hear in HR. IQ gets you hired, but EQ gets you promoted.
Employers are really internalizing this. 71% of organizations value emotional intelligence more than technical skills when evaluating candidates for promotion.
And the benefits aren't just philosophical. They are tangible bottom-line results. Higher employee engagement, dramatically reduced turnover, more innovative problem-solving in teams.
And this feedback loop extends upwards, too. Managers who consistently show empathy are perceived as better and more effective performers by their own bosses.
Right. The global leadership firm DDI found that leaders who prioritize and master empathy perform over 40% higher in key areas like coaching, engaging others, and making those nuanced decisions.
We have some excellent high-profile case studies here that really illustrate how EI is operationalized at the CEO level. Let's start with Satya Nadella and the cultural turnaround at Microsoft.
Nadella took over a company that had a culture defined by internal hostility and a fixed, know-it-all mindset. It was a classic high IQ, low EQ environment.
Right.
He anchored Microsoft's entire cultural revitalization in empathy. He didn't see empathy as a soft skill. He articulated it as a hard engine for innovation. He argued you cannot build products that solve unmet customer needs unless you have deep, genuine empathy for their pain points and their experience.
That makes perfect sense. Innovation is an emotional process as much as a logical one. Another powerful example is Indra Nooyi, the former CEO of PepsiCo.
Nooyi operationalized EI through her famous approach of leading with heart. She practiced active relationship management on a profound scale. Famously, she wrote these deeply personal letters to the parents of her senior executives, thanking them for the gift of their children. This simple but profound act built immense loyalty. It moved beyond the typical transactional nature of executive relationships. It acknowledged the full human being, not just the job title. And that results in a culture of psychological commitment that bonuses alone could never achieve.
Even Jeff Bezos, who's often seen as this hyper-rational leader at Amazon, demonstrated a nuanced EI regarding employee well-being.
He spoke frequently about prioritizing work-life harmony, not balance. He argued that the two are a circle, not a seesaw. His point was that the happiness and energy you get from a fulfilling home and personal life brings more focus and productivity to the office.
Which is a sophisticated understanding of self-regulation and how our cognitive and emotional systems are interdependent.
Exactly. Recognizing that productivity is maximized when personal emotional needs are met.
The operationalization of EI in team dynamics, particularly in the tech sector, is best seen through the lens of psychological safety, a concept that's just exploded in importance thanks to researchers like Amy Edmondson.
Psychological safety is the shared belief held by team members that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. So, admitting mistakes, proposing wild or stupid ideas, questioning the status quo without fear of humiliation, retribution, or professional penalty.
And there's a direct causal link to the leader's EI.
A direct link, and it goes right back to the neuroscience we discussed. A low EI leader, someone who's reactive, defensive, prone to public criticism, unpredictable, they create an environment of fear.
And fear triggers the amygdala.
It chronically activates the employee's amygdala. And when the brain is focused on survival, it diverts resources away from the prefrontal cortex, the center for higher-order thinking, creativity, collaboration. Your brain prioritizes surviving the meeting over proposing the next billion-dollar idea.
So the high EI leader uses social awareness and relationship management to actively create the opposite environment. They calm the amygdala.
Exactly. They de-escalate that fear response. They frame failures as learning data. They consistently validate contributions, and they model appropriate emotional responses to setbacks. And the empirical validation for this is definitive.
Google's Project Aristotle.
Google's famous internal study, Project Aristotle. They studied 180 teams for years, expecting to find that success was tied to the aggregate IQs of team members or the diversity of skills. They were wrong. They found that psychological safety was the single most important predictor of a team's effectiveness, far outweighing the individual cognitive profiles of its members.
As technology advances, we've entered the age of AI, and this forces us to fundamentally redefine what human intelligence is actually valuable for. AI excels at IQ tasks, logic, calculation, pattern recognition, data processing.
Which is why the World Economic Forum ranks EI skills, motivation, empathy, ethical judgment, inspiration among the top core competencies for the future workforce. When algorithms commoditize logic and calculation, the economic value of human labor just shifts dramatically.
We are transitioning rapidly into what some researchers are calling the feeling economy.
The feeling economy is where economic and professional value shifts almost entirely to emotional labor and tasks that require human nuance. These are the high-touch roles, the sales executive negotiating a delicate deal, the therapist handling trauma, the leader inspiring a disillusioned workforce.
The ethical committee navigating a moral gray area.
All of it. AI lacks the biological substrate for these tasks. It has no VMPFC, no somatic markers. It cannot authentically feel the weight of responsibility or sense a client's hesitation.
Therefore, the human leader becomes the essential algorithm for social responsibility and moral judgment.
They become the necessary intermediary. A high EI leader has to interpret algorithmic efficiency through a lens of human values. An algorithm might recommend a mass layoff to instantly optimize profit margins. But the high EI leader has to weigh the long-term emotional impact on community trust, employee loyalty, brand reputation variables the purely logical AI system might drastically undervalue.
This is where human emotional wisdom has to take precedence over pure computational logic.
It has to. And this rapid pace of digital transformation also brings a significant new emotional challenge. Technostress.
Technostress.
Yeah, the anxiety, the cognitive strain, the resistance that's associated with constantly adapting to new, rapidly changing technologies. High EI leaders are essential buffers here. They use social awareness to recognize the signs of stress and anxiety in their teams. And crucially, they use empathy to validate the very real fear of obsolescence that AI often triggers in people.
They manage the emotional arc of organizational change with compassion.
Right, helping employees pivot to new roles that emphasize human interaction and relational skills.
There's an interesting, almost paradoxical twist here, though. While AI is defining the limits of human value, it's also helping us get better at the work it can't do.
That's the irony of this situation. AI and machine learning are now being deployed as tools to train and enhance human EI. They provide these sophisticated simulations of difficult conversations, employee feedback, performance reviews, ethical disagreements, where leaders can practice empathy and self-regulation and feedback delivery in a risk-free, measurable environment.
So you're honing those uniquely human skills that are now the most valuable in the marketplace.
Exactly.
Now that we've established the neuroscience, the organizational impact, and the future necessity of EQ, Let's get practical. How do we actually cultivate this intelligence? The sources are universal that EI is a learnable skill set, but where does the intentional work begin?
The cultivation process begins and often returns to the foundational domains, self-awareness and self-regulation. You can't manage an emotion you haven't accurately labeled or even acknowledged. The first goal is to just interrupt the automatic loop of stimulus and reaction.
So, what are the essential daily tools for building that critical self-awareness muscle?
Regular emotional check-ins through journaling are crucial. And this isn't just venting, it's cognitive data collection. You should record. What did I feel? What was the specific trigger? What was my resulting action? And was that outcome aligned with my goals? This disciplined process helps you map your own emotional geography.
And identify those recurring disruptive patterns.
And consistently feeling irritated by a specific type of feedback, for example.
And since self-perception can be so biased, how do we get a reality check on our emotional impact?
By seeking 360-degree feedback, self-awareness is often a blind spot. Getting objective, anonymous data from your peers, your subordinates, your superiors, it provides an essential reality check on how your emotional state and communication style are actually impacting the people you interact with.
It can be uncomfortable.
It can be very uncomfortable, but it turns your subjective self-perception into objective data.
The most universal, accessible tool for self-awareness seems to be mindfulness.
Mindfulness meditation is so powerful because it trains attentional stability. It's the practice of observing your thoughts and feelings without judgment. And this creates a critical space, the pause between the initial feeling, the stimulus, and your subsequent reaction, the response.
And that pause is the essence of self-regulation.
It is. It gives you that fractional second you need to choose a value-aligned action instead of just reverting to an impulse.
Let's discuss self-regulation in action. If I feel intense anger, how do I regulate it beyond just, breathing? We need to talk about cognitive reframing.
Cognitive reframing is key. It means consciously reevaluating the narrative of a negative event to alter its emotional impact. The process has 3 steps. First, identify your interpretation. For example, my boss is criticizing me because they don't value my work.
Okay.
Second, challenge that interpretation. Is there another explanation? Maybe the boss is under a lot of pressure. Third, substitute a productive frame.
Give us a concrete example of a productive frame substitution.
Okay, so instead of viewing a critical piece of feedback as an attack on your competence, which is a threat, and it triggers anger, you consciously reframe it as objective data for improvement, which is a challenge, and it triggers focused attention.
So you're leveraging that using emotion to facilitate thought branch we talked about earlier.
Exactly. You're optimizing your emotional state for a productive outcome rather than just self-defense.
Let's shift to enhancing social skills and empathy. Active listening is often cited as the bedrock here, but what does active actually look like?
Active listening means focusing completely on what the other person is saying. It means making a deliberate effort to silence your internal monologue where you're mentally preparing your response.
Which is so hard to do.
It's so hard. It requires paying intense attention to nonverbal cues, the shift in their posture, the frequency of blinking, their tone of voice, and then summarizing or reflecting back what you heard to confirm your understanding.
But there's a surprisingly accessible, source-supported technique for improving empathy that doesn't involve meditation or corporate training: reading literature.
This is one of the coolest findings. Research suggests that reading complex literary fiction improves empathy by immersing you in diverse, challenging inner worlds. When you read a novel, you're constantly asked to infer the motivations, the internal conflicts, the emotional logic of characters who are unlike you.
And this exercise strengthens the neural pathways responsible for theory of mind.
Right. The ability to understand that other people have beliefs and intentions different from your own. It makes you more empathetic in your real-world interactions.
Academic interventions have yielded some highly structured methodologies for training these skills, like the Ruler method from the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence.
Ruler is a systemic, highly practical approach. It stands for recognizing, understanding, labeling, expressing, and regulating emotions. It gives you specific, deployable tools to break down the EI process into measurable steps.
Let's zoom in on a couple of Ruler's core tools. The labeling component seems especially critical for self-awareness.
It is, because most of us default to these binary labels, good or bad. Ruler introduces the mood meter, which is a coordinate grid that plots emotions based on energy, high or low, and pleasantness, high or low.
And this tool helps you move beyond simple labels to emotional granularity.
Exactly. Instead of saying you feel bad, you might realize you are frustrated, which is low energy, unpleasant, versus enraged, which is high energy, unpleasant.
And why does having more nuanced labels matter so much?
Because the regulation strategy changes completely based on the nuance. The strategy for managing deep frustration, which might require a small win or a change in task, is fundamentally different from the strategy required to manage explosive rage, which requires immediate physiological downregulation, like that 20-minute timeout.
The better you label, the more effective your regulation strategy will be.
Exactly.
And the meta moment is Ruler's practical tool for managing an emotional trigger in real time.
The meta moment is a cognitive tool for self-regulation. When you're triggered, you are taught to follow these steps. First, hit pause, physically stop speaking or moving. Second, take a deep breath to downregulate the nervous system. Third, visualize your best self, the person you want to be in the situation, aligning your identity with your core values like being calm, fair, insightful.
And only then do you choose a response that's aligned with that best self rather than your immediate impulse.
It's an intentional choice to step outside the emotional reaction.
Another famous program, born out of the heart of the tech industry, is Google's search Inside Yourself, or SIY.
SIY approaches EI training through a deep focus on mindfulness and applied neuroscience. Its premise is that self-awareness requires attentional stability, so they use mindfulness meditation to train your attention, cultivating a metacognitive awareness. This is the ability to observe your own thoughts and feelings as passing events from a detached third-person perspective. They call this decentering.
And how does decentering help with EI?
If you're decentered, you can see your anger as an emotion I'm experiencing right now, rather than who I am right now. And this observation creates that critical space between stimulus and response, making emotional choice possible.
Okay, finally, as we apply EI globally, we have to acknowledge that emotional intelligence is not culturally neutral. If you're leading internationally, high EI requires cultural sensitivity.
Absolutely. The biological machinery of emotion is universal, but the expression and the valuation of those emotions vary dramatically based on culture. We have to understand affect valuation theory. For example, Western individualized cultures often value high positive states, excitement, enthusiasm, high energy. These are seen as indicators of engagement and happiness.
And how does that contrast with other cultures?
Many East Asian or collectivist cultures, by contrast, often value low arousal positive states, calmness, serenity, and peace. These are seen as indicators of emotional maturity and high social harmony.
So high EI in a global context requires cultural intelligence.
It demands an adjustment of your emotional expression to match the audience's cultural ideal effect. A calm, measured Eastern leader might be misread by a Western staff as disengaged or unmotivated because they aren't projecting that high arousal enthusiasm.
And vice versa.
Conversely, a highly expressive Western leader might seem immature, aggressive, or inappropriately emotional to an East Asian team that's seeking serenity and measured response. High EI here means accurately perceiving the cultural norm and managing your expression to foster connection, not alienation.
This has been an incredibly detailed deep dive into emotional intelligence. So to summarize our journey, we've learned that EI is a complex, measurable, learnable, and absolutely essential skill set that profoundly influences every aspect of success.
We covered the foundational models ability, mixed, and trait, and we established through the stunning insights of the Somatic Marker Hypothesis and the Iowa gambling task that emotion is not the enemy of reason. It is indispensable for rational, timely decision-making.
We are fundamentally feeling machines that think, and our gut feeling is often smarter than our conscious logic.
Right. And we learned that the high EI tools exist to save our teams and our relationships, whether that's by creating psychological safety in the workplace, or using the ruler method to gain emotional granularity, or deploying the soft startup to defeat the contempt that otherwise ends a marriage.
Ultimately, the evidence confirms that the systematic development of self-awareness, self-regulation, social awareness, and relationship management substantially enhances how our cognitive and technical capabilities are applied in the real world.
Separating average performers from true leaders.
So let's end with a final provocative thought for you to consider as you wrap up this deep dive. We discussed how the increasing sophistication of AI is aggressively taking over the realm of calculation, data, and logic, the domain of IQ.
So if AI handles the calculation and the logic, how will we as individuals and as organizations continue to intentionally invest in and measure the uniquely human capacity for vulnerability, for ethical judgment, for deep connection, and the ability to inspire?
The economic value of the future is shifting toward the ability to manage complexity.
And complexity is always emotional. The journey toward maximizing human capability is fundamentally an emotional one, and that is a job only we can do.